William and Kate's silent goodbye. Document. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window. Watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below, her fingers traced the cool glass as she observed their careful movements, each gesture deliberate and purposeful. She had always found solace in routine, in the predictable rhythm of daily life that came with royal duties, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of an ending that no one else could see coming. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He had been awake for hours, sitting in his study, staring at documents that seemed to blur together on his desk. The pressure of recent months had etched new lines around his eyes, and Catherine could see the exhaustion he tried so hard to hide from the public. They had perfected the art of maintaining composure, of presenting a united front even when their private world was shifting beneath their feet. The conversation that would change everything began with the simplest of observations. Catherine turned from the window and mentioned how peaceful the gardens looked in the early morning light. William nodded, understanding immediately that she wasn't really talking about the gardens at all. They had developed this language over the years, this way of communicating profound truths through seemingly mundane observations. The weight of unspoken words filled the space between them. Catherine moved to her dressing table, beginning her morning routine with the same precision she applied to everything else. As she brushed her hair, she caught William's reflection in the mirror. He was watching her with an intensity that spoke of memorization, as if he were trying to capture this moment and hold it forever. The realization hit her then, with the force of recognition. They were both preparing for something that neither wanted to name aloud. The children's voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the castle, a reminder of the lives that would be most affected by any decision they might make. George's laughter carried clearly through the corridors, followed by Charlotte's more measured tones as she corrected something her younger brother had said. Louis, still small enough to find wonder in everything, was probably asking 1,000 questions about whatever had caught his attention that morning. William crossed the room and placed his hands on Catherine's shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. The gesture was tender, familiar, yet carried an undercurrent of finality that made Catherine's breath catch. They had weathered so many storms together, had faced criticism and praise with equal grace, had learned to navigate the impossible balance between private happiness and public duty. But some challenges they both understood required different kinds of courage. The phone on the bedside table began to ring, its sharp tone cutting through the morning quiet. Neither of them moved to answer it. They knew it would be the first of many calls that day, each one drawing them back into the relentless schedule that had become their lives. Appearances to make, hands to shake, speeches to deliver, all while maintaining the perfect facade that the public expected and deserved. Catherine's mind wandered to the hundreds of events they had attended together, the countless photographs that captured their smiles, but never quite revealed the private conversations that happened in the moments between poses. She thought about the way William's hand would find the small of her back when they walked into a room full of strangers, the subtle signal that they were facing whatever came next as a team. The irony wasn't lost on her that their greatest strength, their ability to present a unified front, to support each other through any crisis, might also be what made this particular moment so devastating. They had become so skilled at protecting each other from the outside world that they had perhaps forgotten how to protect themselves from the quiet erosion that came from always putting duty before desire. William moved away from her, walking to his wardrobe to select the day's outfit. Even this simple task carried symbolic weight now. Every choice, every appearance, every word would be scrutinized and analyzed, especially once people began to notice the subtle changes that were already beginning to occur. The slight distance in photographs, the briefer touches, the smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Catherine finished her preparations and joined him at the window. They stood side by side, looking out at the world that would soon be watching their every move with new intensity. The media had always been fascinated by their relationship, from their university courtship through their fairy tale wedding, to their evolution into working parents, balancing royal duties with family life. But this chapter would require them to demonstrate a different kind of grace. The silence between them was comfortable, yet charged with unspoken understanding. They had reached a crossroads that demanded impossible choices, and they both knew that whatever path they chose would disappoint someone. The public who had invested so much hope in their story, the family who had welcomed Catherine with such warmth, the children who deserved stability above all else. William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with the easy familiarity of 15 years together. The gesture was automatic, instinctive, yet it carried the weight of all the times they had faced uncertainty together. Catherine squeezed his hand in response, a silent acknowledgement that whatever came next, they would handle it with the same dignity and respect that had characterized their entire relationship. The morning stretched ahead of them, full of obligations and expectations, but for this moment, they allowed themselves to simply exist in the space between what was and what might be. The decision had been made, though neither had spoken it aloud yet. The timing would have to be perfect, the announcement carefully crafted, the transition handled with the utmost care for everyone involved. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting new patterns of light across the room, Catherine and William prepared to begin the most difficult performance of their lives, the art of letting go with such grace that the world would remember them not for the ending, but for the extraordinary dignity with which they chose to write it. The private dining room at Kensington Palace had always been Catherine's favorite space for family meals. The intimate setting, with its warm lighting and comfortable chairs, provided a stark contrast to the formal dining halls where they entertained dignitaries and hosted state functions. This morning, as she arranged fresh flowers in a simple crystal vase, she found herself paying attention to details that had become second nature over the years. William entered carrying Louis, who was still in his pajamas and chattering excitedly about a dream involving flying horses and chocolate castles. The sight of her husband and youngest son together created a familiar warmth in Catherine's chest, mixed now with an ache she couldn't quite name. These ordinary moments had become precious in a way that felt almost painful. George appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his school uniform, his hair neatly combed and his shoes properly tied. At his age, he had begun to understand that their family lived differently from others, that photographers waited outside their gates and that strangers knew their names. But he hadn't yet grasped the full weight of what it meant to be born into a life where personal choices were never entirely personal. Charlotte followed close behind her older brother, her uniform equally pristine, but her hair showing signs of having been hastily brushed. She possessed an intuitive understanding of people and situations that sometimes surprised the adults around her. This morning, Catherine noticed her daughter's eyes moving between her parents with a thoughtfulness that seemed beyond her years. The breakfast conversation flowed as it always did, with updates about school projects and weekend plans, questions about upcoming family events, and the gentle teasing that marked the comfortable rhythms of their household. But underneath the normalcy, Catherine sensed a current of awareness, particularly from William, who seemed to be absorbing every detail with unusual intensity. When William announced that he needed to speak with his father that afternoon, the children accepted the information without question. Such meetings were routine in their lives, part of the complex web of family and constitutional obligations that shaped their days. But Catherine heard something in his tone that the children missed, a formality that suggested this conversation would be different from their usual discussions about schedules and appearances. After the children left for school, accompanied by their security detail and the efficient staff who had become extended family over the years, Catherine and William found themselves alone in the sudden quiet of the empty house. The silence felt profound, heavy with unspoken thoughts and careful considerations that had been building for months. Catherine began clearing the breakfast dishes, a task she could easily delegate but often chose to do herself. The simple domesticity of the action provided a welcome contrast to the ceremonial nature of so much of their public life. William joined her, falling into the easy partnership that had developed over years of sharing both grand responsibilities and mundane tasks. As they worked together, Catherine found herself studying William's profile, noting the way concentration created a slight furrow between his brows, the careful precision with which he handled even the simplest tasks. These observations felt important now, as if she were creating a mental catalog of moments that might need to sustain her through whatever changes lay ahead. The phone calls began shortly after 9, the first from William's private secretary confirming the afternoon meeting at Clarence House. Catherine watched as William's demeanor shifted subtly into his professional mode, his voice taking on the measured tones that the public knew so well. She had witnessed this transformation thousands of times, but today it struck her as particularly significant. When William's conversation ended, they stood facing each other across the kitchen island that had witnessed countless family discussions, arguments, celebrations, and quiet moments of connection. The marble surface between them seemed to represent something larger, the space that had grown between their public selves and their private desires, between duty and personal happiness, between what the world expected and what their hearts could sustain. Catherine spoke first, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what she was about to acknowledge. She mentioned how proud she was of what they had built together, how grateful she felt for the years of partnership and shared purpose. William nodded, understanding immediately that she was giving voice to thoughts that had been weighing on both of them. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had ever had. They spoke with the careful honesty of people who respected each other too much to pretend that love alone could solve every problem. They acknowledged the ways their relationship had evolved, the pressures that had tested them, the growing awareness that their individual paths might be leading in different directions. Neither of them used words like separation or divorce. Those terms felt too harsh, too final for what they were contemplating. Instead, they spoke of transitions, of new chapters, of ways to honor both their shared history and their individual needs. They discussed their children with the fierce protectiveness that had always been their strongest common ground, planning how to shield George, Charlotte, and Louis from the inevitable scrutiny, while helping them understand that love could exist in many forms. William reached across the island to take Catherine's hand, a gesture that had comforted them both through countless difficult conversations. But this time the touch felt different, not less loving, but charged with a new kind of recognition. They were about to embark on something unprecedented in recent royal history, a conscious uncoupling that would require them to redefine not only their relationship, but their individual roles within the monarchy. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows, highlighting the dust motes that danced in the air between them. Catherine found herself thinking about those particles, how they moved independently yet remained part of the same space, connected by invisible forces yet free to follow their own paths. The metaphor felt appropriate for what they were contemplating. As the time for William's meeting approached, they both understood that the conversation at Clarence House would set irreversible changes in motion. Protocols would be established, statements would be drafted, and the careful choreography of public separation would begin. But for now, in the quiet intimacy of their kitchen, they could hold space for the magnitude of what they were choosing to do together. Clarence House stood imposing against the gray London afternoon as William's car pulled through the gates. The familiar routine of arriving at his father's residence felt different today, weighted with a conversation that would reshape not just his personal life, but the future of the monarchy itself. The security guards nodded their usual respectful greetings, unaware that the young man they protected was about to deliver news that would send shockwaves through the institution they all served. King Charles was waiting in his private study, a room that had witnessed decades of family discussions, constitutional crises, and personal revelations. The walls lined with books and family photographs created an atmosphere of intimacy that contrasted sharply with the formal reception rooms where state business was typically conducted. William noticed his father had chosen this setting deliberately, understanding instinctively that what they were about to discuss required privacy and personal connection, rather than ceremonial distance. The initial conversation meandered through familiar territory, updates on the children's progress at school, discussion of upcoming royal engagements, observations about recent public appearances. But Charles, with the intuition developed over decades of reading people and situations, sensed that his son had come with a purpose that extended beyond routine family check-ins. The careful way William chose his words, the unusual formality in his posture, suggested that this meeting would prove significant. When William finally found the courage to broach the subject that had brought him there, he spoke with the measured precision that characterized all his public communications. He talked about the evolution of his relationship with Catherine, the pressures they faced as public figures, and the growing awareness that their individual paths might be leading them in different directions. Charles listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing of the emotions that must have been churning beneath his composed exterior. The discussion that followed was unlike any father-son conversation they had ever shared. Charles spoke of his own journey through marriage, divorce, and eventual happiness with Camilla. He acknowledged the unique pressures that came with royal relationships, the way personal happiness often had to be weighed against constitutional considerations and public expectations. His words carried the wisdom of someone who had navigated similar waters. Though under very different circumstances and with far less public sympathy, William appreciated his father's understanding but also recognized the unprecedented nature of what he and Catherine were contemplating. Previous royal separations had been marked by scandal, bitter public battles, and damage to the monarchy's reputation. What they envisioned was something entirely different, a conscious uncoupling that prioritized dignity, respect, and the well-being of their children above all other considerations. Charles asked the questions that William had expected, about the children's welfare, about the impact on William's role as heir to the throne, about the constitutional implications of such a decision. They discussed the delicate balance between personal autonomy and royal duty, the way individual choices rippled through the entire institution, affecting not just family members but the hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on the stability of the monarchy. As the afternoon wore on, William found himself describing the careful planning that he and Catherine had already begun. They had consulted with constitutional lawyers, met discreetly with family therapists who specialized in high-profile divorces, and begun the delicate process of preparing their children for changes that would inevitably affect every aspect of their lives. The level of preparation impressed Charles, who recognized the maturity and thoughtfulness with which his son was approaching this monumental decision. The conversation turned to practical matters, the timing of any announcement, the coordination with government officials, the management of media coverage that would inevitably be intense and often invasive. Charles shared insights from his own experience with public scrutiny during his divorce from Diana, offering both warnings about potential pitfalls and encouragement about the possibility of emerging from such challenges with dignity and tact. Meanwhile, across London, Catherine was having her own difficult conversation with her parents in the privacy of their Chelsea home. The modest house where she had grown up provided a sharp contrast to the royal residences that had become her primary homes. Yet it offered something equally valuable, the unconditional love and support of people who had known her long before she became a global icon. Michael and Carol Middleton listened to their daughter with the same mixture of pride and concern that had characterized their relationship with her royal marriage from the beginning. They had watched Catherine navigate the challenges of public life with grace and determination, had seen her grow from a young woman in love into a confident mother and respected public figure. Now they were witnessing her demonstrate a different kind of courage, like the strength to acknowledge when something wasn't working and the wisdom to choose change over continued struggle. The discussion in the Middleton household was more emotional than the formal conversation taking place at Clarence House, but it was no less thoughtful or strategic. Catherine's parents had always been protective of their daughter's happiness, sometimes clashing with royal protocol when they felt her well-being was at stake. Now they offered both practical support and emotional validation for a decision that they recognized had been reached after careful consideration and much personal struggle. As evening approached, both William and Catherine were engaged in conversations about logistics and timing, about protecting their children and managing public expectations. But underneath all the practical considerations lay a deeper truth. They were both taking the first concrete steps toward a future that neither had imagined when they exchanged vows at Westminster Abbey over a decade earlier. The weight of what they were choosing became more real with each person they told, each expert they consulted, each detail they planned. Yet both found unexpected relief in finally giving voice to feelings and concerns that had been building for months. The decision itself was painful, but the process of honoring it with such care and respect felt like a gift they were giving not only to themselves, but to everyone who had invested hope and happiness in their story. By the time William returned to Kensington Palace that evening, the wheels of change had been set in motion. The conversation with his father had gone better than he had dared hope, establishing a foundation of support that would prove crucial in the challenging months ahead. Now came the even more difficult task of helping their children understand and accept changes that would reshape their world in ways both subtle and profound. The family weekend at Anmer Hall had always been sacred time for William and Catherine, a chance to step away from the relentless pace of royal duties and simply be parents to their 3 children. The Norfolk countryside provided the privacy and normalcy that their London residence could never offer. With its sprawling grounds where the children could play freely, and its comfortable rooms that felt more like a family home than a royal residence. This particular weekend carried additional significance, as William and Catherine had agreed it would be the time to begin conversations with George, Charlotte, and Louis about the changes coming to their family. The decision to tell the children at Anmer Hall was deliberate. They wanted this discussion to happen in the place where their children felt most at ease, surrounded by the familiar comforts of their favorite retreat. Saturday morning found the family scattered across the property, according to their individual interests. George was in the garden with William, both of them focused on a complicated construction project involving a new treehouse that had been planned for months. Charlotte was helping Catherine arrange flowers picked from their private gardens, her careful attention to color and composition revealing the artistic sensibility she had inherited from both parents. Louis, still young enough to find magic in the simplest activities, was dividing his time between both groups, carrying messages and small tools between the treehouse builders and the flower arrangers. His chatter provided a constant soundtrack to the morning, his questions and observations creating the kind of ordinary family moments that Catherine knew she would treasure, regardless of what changes lay ahead. The conversation began gradually, as Catherine and William had agreed it should. During lunch on the terrace overlooking the gardens they had cultivated together, William mentioned that families sometimes faced changes that required everyone to be brave and understanding. Catherine added that the most important thing was making sure everyone felt loved and secure, no matter what adjustments they might need to make. George, with the perceptiveness that had marked his personality since early childhood, immediately sensed that his parents were building toward something significant. His questions were direct but thoughtful, revealing both his maturity and his underlying concern for his younger siblings. Charlotte listened carefully but said little, her expressive eyes moving between her parents as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. Louis, at his age, was less concerned with abstract concepts of change and more interested in concrete reassurances about his immediate world. His questions focused on practical matters, whether he would still have his favorite bedroom, whether the family dogs would still live with them, whether his toys and books would remain in their familiar places. The afternoon was spent in activities that reinforced the family bonds, while allowing for natural opportunities to continue the conversation. They went for a long walk through the woods surrounding the property, a tradition that had become one of their favorite ways to spend time together, away from the scrutiny that followed them everywhere else. During the walk, Catherine found herself paying particular attention to the way her children interacted with both her and William, noting the easy affection that characterized all their relationships, George's protective instincts toward his siblings, Charlotte's intuitive understanding of adult emotions, Louis's absolute trust in his parents' ability to handle any situation. All of these observations reinforced her conviction that they were making the right choice in prioritizing the children's well-being. Above all other considerations, as evening approached, the family gathered in the sitting room that had hosted countless similar scenes. Bedtime stories, quiet conversations, games, and puzzles that brought them together after busy days. This time, however, the atmosphere was charged with the weight of important revelations that needed to be shared with age-appropriate honesty. William and Catherine had rehearsed this conversation many times, consulting with child psychologists who specialized in helping families navigate major transitions. They had agreed on language that would be honest without being frightening, clear without being overwhelming. Most importantly, they wanted to emphasize that some things would remain absolutely constant: their love for the children, their commitment to being present and involved parents, their dedication to maintaining stability in the midst of change. The discussion was punctuated by questions from each child, revealing their individual concerns and coping mechanisms. George wanted to understand the timeline for any changes, his practical mind already working to categorize and organize the information he was receiving. Charlotte asked about feelings. Would everyone still be happy? Would there be sadness? How long might difficult emotions last? Louis, true to his age, was most concerned with immediate logistics. He wanted to know whether both parents would still be available for bedtime stories, whether family game nights would continue, whether the special traditions that marked their calendar throughout the year would remain intact. Catherine found herself marveling at her children's resilience and wisdom. They asked difficult questions but accepted the answers with more grace than many adults might have shown. Their primary concern seemed to be ensuring that the love and security they had always known would continue, regardless of what other changes might occur. The evening ended with an extended bedtime routine, with both parents participating in the familiar rituals of bath, stories, and quiet conversations that helped ease the transition from day to night. Catherine lingered in each bedroom, absorbing the precious ordinariness of tucking her children into beds surrounded by their treasured possessions and familiar comforts. After the children were asleep, William and Catherine found themselves alone on the terrace, where the day's difficult conversations had begun. The Norfolk countryside stretched before them in the gathering darkness, peaceful and timeless in a way that provided comfort during a time of such personal upheaval. They talked quietly about how the children had responded, analyzing each reaction and planning follow-up conversations that would help reinforce the messages of love and security they had tried to convey. Both parents felt cautiously optimistic about their children's initial responses, though they knew that processing such significant information would take time and would likely involve additional questions and concerns in the days and weeks ahead. The weekend had accomplished what they had hoped. It had begun the Awido process of preparing their children for change while reinforcing the foundation of love and trust that would carry their family through whatever challenges lay ahead. As they prepared for bed in the house that had sheltered so many important family moments, both William and Catherine felt grateful for the opportunity to handle this transition with such care and intention. The announcement was scheduled for a quiet Tuesday morning, deliberately chosen to allow maximum time for careful media management before the news cycle reached its inevitable fever pitch. William and Catherine had spent weeks crafting a statement that would convey the necessary information while maintaining the dignity and respect that had characterized their entire relationship. Every word had been scrutinized by constitutional lawyers, communications experts, and trusted family advisors. In the private office at Kensington Palace, Catherine sat reviewing the final draft one last time. The language was careful and measured, expressing mutual respect and continued commitment to their children and royal duties, while acknowledging that their personal relationship had evolved beyond marriage. She had insisted on particular phrases that emphasized their ongoing friendship and shared dedication to the causes they had championed together. William was across town at Clarence House, participating in a final coordination meeting with senior royal household staff and government officials. The constitutional implications of their decision had required careful consideration and unprecedented planning. Unlike previous royal separations, this one needed to be handled with extraordinary care to preserve both personal dignity and institutional stability. The children were at school, blissfully unaware that this ordinary Tuesday would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Both parents had agreed that maintaining normal routines during the initial announcement period would help provide stability while the inevitable media storm swirled around their family. Their teachers and security details had been briefed to provide additional support while keeping the children's school experience as normal as possible. At precisely 11 o'clock, the statement was released simultaneously through official royal channels and major news outlets worldwide. The words that William and Catherine had crafted with such care began their journey into public consciousness, carried by digital networks that would ensure global coverage within minutes of the announcement. The statement was unlike anything the public had seen from the royal family. Rather than the formal, distant language typically associated with official communications, it spoke with genuine emotion about love that had evolved, about respect that endured despite changing circumstances, and about a commitment to co-parenting that would remain unwavering regardless of personal transitions. Catherine remained at Kensington Palace as the news broke, choosing to be present at the home where her children would return that afternoon. She wanted to be available for any questions or concerns that might arise as they processed the reality of seeing their private family situation become global news. The privacy that had shielded them throughout their childhood was about to be tested in ways none of them had experienced before. William's schedule that day had been carefully cleared, to allow him flexibility in responding to immediate fallout from the announcement. He remained at Clarence's house, participating in conference calls with communications teams and constitutional experts who were monitoring public and institutional reactions to the news. The carefully orchestrated response plan they had developed was being implemented across multiple channels simultaneously. The initial media response was unlike anything royal correspondents had experienced in their careers. Rather than the scandal-focused coverage that had characterized previous royal separations, many outlets led with admiration for the mature, respectful way William and Catherine were handling their transition. The statement's emphasis on continued cooperation and mutual respect seemed to catch many observers by surprise. Social media reactions ranged from disappointment and sadness to admiration and support. Millions of people who had invested emotional energy in the fairy tale aspects of William and Catherine's relationship were grappling with the reality that even seemingly perfect marriages could reach natural endings. However, the overwhelming tone was one of respect for how they were choosing to handle such a personal situation with public grace. By mid-afternoon, when the children's school day ended, both parents were at Kensington Palace to greet them together. The sight of George, Charlotte, and Louis arriving home to find both parents waiting reinforced the message they had been trying to communicate, that the fundamental structure of their family love remained intact. Despite the changes occurring in their parents' relationship, the children had been somewhat prepared for the reality that their family situation would become public knowledge, but seeing it actually happen proved different from their abstract understanding. George in particular seemed sobered by the realization that strangers around the world were now discussing his family's private business. Charlotte appeared more focused on her parents' emotional states, watching carefully for signs of sadness or distress. Louis, consistent with his age and temperament, was primarily interested in whether the increased attention would affect his immediate plans and routines. His questions focused on practical matters. Would they still go to the park? Would there be more photographers than usual? Would his friends at school treat him differently now that everyone knew about his parents' separation? The evening routine that night was deliberately normal, with family dinner, homework supervision, and the bedtime rituals that had provided structure throughout their lives. Both parents participated fully, demonstrating through their actions the continued partnership they had promised in their statement. The children seemed reassured by this consistency, though all three exhibited signs of processing the day's significant developments. After the children were settled for the night, William and Catherine found themselves alone together for the first time since the announcement had been released to the world. The relief of finally having the news public was tempered by the awareness that they had just irrevocably changed not only their own lives but also the lives of everyone who cared about them. They spent the evening reviewing the day's media coverage and planning for the increased scrutiny that would inevitably follow. Both recognized that the respectful tone of the initial coverage was likely to give way to more intrusive speculation as the story developed. They would need to remain vigilant about protecting their children's privacy while maintaining the dignified public presence that had earned them such widespread respect. The conversation that night was different from any they had shared throughout their marriage. They spoke as partners who had successfully navigated an extremely challenging situation together, rather than as spouses struggling with personal difficulties. The transition from married couple to cooperative co-parents was already beginning to reshape their dynamic in ways that felt both sad and hopeful. They prepared to spend their first night in the same house as a separated couple. Both William and Catherine felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was grief for what they were leaving behind, uncertainty about what lay ahead, but also pride in how they had handled something so difficult with such care and respect. They had managed to transform what could have been a scandal into something approaching a celebration of mature, responsible decision-making. 6 months after the announcement that had captured the world's attention, William and Catherine stood together in the gardens of Kensington Palace, watching their children play with a freedom that had seemed impossible during the initial media frenzy. The intense scrutiny that had followed their separation had gradually settled into a new normal, one that allowed their family to function with surprising stability despite the changed circumstances. the transition had not been without its challenges. There had been difficult days when the children struggled with questions from classmates, when photographers were more persistent than usual, when the emotional weight of their decision felt heavier than either parent had anticipated. But there had also been unexpected moments of joy and discovery, as both William and Catherine found themselves exploring aspects of their individual identities that had been subsumed by their roles as a couple. Catherine had thrown herself into her charitable work with renewed energy, finding in her advocacy for early childhood development a passion that felt entirely her own. Her recent speech at the Global Mental Health Summit had been praised not just for its content but for the evident personal conviction with which she delivered it. Free from the constant need to coordinate every public appearance with William's schedule, she had discovered a confidence in her own voice that surprised even her closest advisors. William, meanwhile, had been able to deepen his commitment to environmental causes in ways that felt more authentic and urgent. His recent documentary about conservation efforts in Africa had received critical acclaim, praised for its intimate perspective and genuine emotional engagement. The freedom to pursue projects based purely on his own interests and timeline had reinvigorated his sense of purpose in ways he hadn't expected. Their co-parenting relationship had evolved into something that many divorced couples might envy. Weekly family dinners continued as scheduled, with both parents present and engaged. School events were attended together whenever possible, presenting a united front that reinforced their children's sense of security. Holidays were carefully coordinated to ensure that traditions remained intact while allowing both parents time for personal renewal. George had adapted to the new arrangement with the resilience that had always characterized his approach to change. His questions had evolved from concerns about logistics to more sophisticated inquiries about adult relationships and the nature of love itself. His conversations with both parents had taken on a maturity that sometimes startled them, revealing a young man who was learning important lessons about honesty, respect, and the courage required to make difficult decisions. Charlotte had initially been the most affected by the transition, her sensitive nature making her acutely aware of every subtle change in family dynamics. However, she had also been the quickest to recognize the benefits of the new arrangement. She had begun to comment on how much happier both her parents seemed, how much more present they were during the time they spent together as a family. Her intuitive understanding of emotions had helped her younger brother process the changes with less anxiety than might otherwise have occurred. Louis, now more accustomed to the rhythms of their restructured family life, had developed a matter-of-fact attitude toward having parents who lived in different homes but remained constant presences in his daily routine. His adaptability had been a source of reassurance for both William and Catherine, proof that children could thrive in unconventional family structures when those structures were built on love and consistency. The public response had continued to evolve in ways that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Rather than becoming a source of scandal or disappointment, their separation had sparked conversations about modern relationships, the pressure of public life, and the courage required to prioritize personal happiness alongside institutional responsibilities. Many people had expressed admiration for their approach, seeing in their story a model for how high-profile divorces could be handled with dignity. The media coverage had also shifted from speculation about personal failures to analysis of their individual achievements and continued collaboration. Their separate appearances at royal events were covered with focus on their professional accomplishments rather than personal drama. When they appeared together at events involving their children or shared charitable interests, the coverage emphasized their successful partnership as co-parents and colleagues. The most moving moment had come 3 months after the separation. During a joint appearance at a children's hospital, they had both championed for years. Watching them work together with young patients, their easy collaboration and shared commitment to the cause, observers were reminded that some bonds transcend romantic relationships. The genuine affection and respect they maintained for each other was evident in every interaction, creating a new template for what post-divorce relationships could look like when handled with maturity and grace. Their individual living arrangements had been established with careful attention to the children's needs and comfort. Catherine remained at Kensington Palace most of the time, providing stability and continuity for daily routines. William had taken up residence at Clarence House during weekdays, allowing him closer proximity to his father and his expanded royal duties, while maintaining his own suite at Kensington Palace for family time and overnight visits with the children. The practical aspects of their separation had been handled with the same meticulous planning that had characterized the announcement. Financial arrangements had been settled without public disclosure or acrimony. Custody schedules were designed around the children's needs rather than parental preferences. Public appearances were coordinated to present a consistent message about family unity despite changed circumstances. Friends and family members had been amazed by how well both William and Catherine had navigated the transition. Many had expected more visible signs of stress or conflict, but instead they witnessed two people who seemed to have found peace with a difficult decision and were committed to implementing it with maximum consideration for everyone affected. The divorce had actually seemed to strengthen certain aspects of their relationship, removing the pressure of romantic expectations and allowing them to appreciate each other's strengths in new ways. The evening that marked the 6-month anniversary of their announcement found both parents at Kensington Palace for one of their regular family dinners. The children had grown accustomed to these occasions, which maintained the feeling of family togetherness while acknowledging the reality of their parents' separate lives. Conversation flowed easily, covering school achievements, upcoming family events, and shared memories that continued to bind them together. After the children were settled for the night, William and Catherine found themselves in the sitting room, where so many important family discussions had taken place over the years. The space held countless memories of their life together, but tonight it felt peaceful rather than melancholy, a testament to how successfully they had managed to honor their past while embracing their future. They spoke quietly about the changes they had observed in themselves and their children over the past months. Both acknowledged moments of sadness and uncertainty, but they also recognized signs of growth and renewed purpose that had emerged from their decision to prioritize honesty over convention. Their children were thriving, their individual passions were flourishing, and their respect for each other had deepened rather than diminished. As William prepared to leave for Clarence's house that night, the goodbye between them carried none of the awkwardness that had marked the early days of their separation. Instead, there was warmth, gratitude, and a shared sense of accomplishment. They had managed something that many had thought impossible. They had ended their marriage without ending their family, had chosen change without choosing bitterness, had found a way to let go that felt more like a gift than a loss. Standing at the window watching William's car disappear into the London night, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fairy tale wedding, the years of public service, the joy of raising children together, and now this, a different kind of happy ending, one that honored both their shared history and their individual futures. The world had watched their story unfold from courtship through marriage to separation, and in doing so had witnessed something unprecedented, a royal couple who had chosen to rewrite the rules about what love could look like when transformed by wisdom, respect, and the courage to choose authenticity over expectation. Their silent goodbye had indeed left millions in tears, but they were tears of admiration rather than disappointment, tears that recognized the extraordinary grace with which two people could choose to love each other differently when loving each other forever was no longer possible.